Hello. Welcome to tonight's bedtime story by Lucid Tales. I hope your day has been kind and full of love. But whether it has been gentle waves or stormy seas for you, it's time to relax now. Find somewhere comfortable, maybe your bed or a favorite armchair, and make sure you're ready for sleep. Take a few deep, slow breaths and feel the freedom in your chest, the little loosening that means it's time for bed. Tonight's story is of Pan Gu and how he created the world. As long ago as forever, as far back as the beginning of the world and farther back still, there was nothingness. Not a still, peaceful nothingness, but a whirling, violent storm of nothingness and confusion that whipped like the great dust storms that blow year after year off the great Mongolian steppes and change the very landscape of northern China. In the middle of all this chaos, amongst the mighty winds and fierce raging, was an egg. This egg floated, still and stoic, for 18,000 years, while all around it the terrible pandemonium whirled and whipped around. Then, at last, as eggs do, it began to hatch. First one crack bled across its surface, pitted with millennia of flying debris, then another and another, until there was a spiderweb of fine lines crisscrossing its fragile surface. Then, all at once, out of the egg erupted a man, tall and hairy, with strange horns on his head. He unfolded out of the egg like a calf off a glacier, as mighty and slow as the nothingness surrounding him was fast and reeling. The great giant Pan Gu opened his eyes, and those eyes did not like what they saw, dearies, now did they? A great spinning mass of nothingness, a storm of dark and light, and no air to be found at all. And so Pan Gu, in a rage, lifted his great mountain of a fist, and with it he shattered the murk into 1,000 smithereens. Instantly the clouds and whirling storm cleared, and the parts that made it up began to gently float apart and separate like stars. The bright, shiny yang pieces flew up bright and hot and became the sky, while the dark, hard yin fell heavy and cold to the ground. And Pan Gu drew himself up and stood between them, his mighty feet planted firmly on the ground and his shoulders wedged tight beneath the sky. For another 18,000 years he stood, growing taller and stronger and forcing the sky higher and higher and the ground lower and denser until he formed a living column 1,000 leagues tall to hold the roof of the sky and prevent it from falling down and crushing the earth with its weight. In time, Pan Gu grew restless, and so he fashioned himself a mallet and chisel and worked hard with them to chip away at the universe, carving it into beautiful and strange shapes. Over time, 4 companions came to him to aid his work: the fiery phoenix and golden dragon, the just Shilin and the wise tortoise. That is why those creatures are still known as the holiest and most sacred even today. When at last Pan Gu was satisfied with the earth and sure that the sky was fixed and firm in its place, he sat an enormous mountain at each of the 4 corners of the world to ensure it would stay up, and then laid himself down for a well-earned nap. He sleeps still, and every part of him, like Ymir, is a part of the world you yourself might recognize. His breath became the clouds and clear winds that cleanse the earth to keep it fresh and sweet. His deep, booming voice became the thunder, his left eye the sun, his right the moon. His blood flows in the world's oceans and rivers, while his hair became the plants and trees, the rocks and minerals, the precious stones of the earth, the pearls, rubies, gold, cinnabar, jade, and diamonds are his teeth and bones. Even the fleas that lived in his fur grew and changed, and became the animals that populate the earth. So beautiful had the world become, the gods themselves came to view it as somewhat akin to their pleasure garden, and paid many frequent visits. They soared over its mountain tops, wandered its meadows and forests, swam deep under the ocean, and feasted on the ripe fruits that grew bountifully among the trees. One of the gods was Nu Kua. She wandered the pleasant world, marvelling at its beauty and yet still somehow dissatisfied. It seemed strangely empty, like there was something that should be there, something she couldn't find. Her great dragon eyes swept the horizon, but found not what she searched for. Her beautiful tail swished lightly from side to side as she walked and pondered. Panku had made a beautiful world. It was true. But there was something missing. Somehow the earth felt lonely. Nu Kua knelt on the ground and took in her fine lacquered claws a ball of yellow clay. She toyed with it for some time, rolling it into different shapes, before fashioning a small head with 2 eyes and a smiling mouth. 2 ears she added, and sculpted cheekbones, a small straight nose and broad brow. Then she made a body, but not a long, sinuous body like hers. For this new creature she crafted 2 legs, 2 arms, and a torso. When she was satisfied, she gently placed her creature on the ground and breathed a warm gust of heavenly incense over it. Slowly, spasmodically, the creature began to move, to stretch out its limbs and discover its own form. In no time at all, it was dancing. Nu Kua made another figure, similar to the first, then another, and another. Soon the earth was populated by these strange, small beings made of clay. For a while Nu Kua sat back, content to watch her creatures explore and enjoy the fascinating world around them. But in time she rose reluctantly to her feet. It was time to go home, back to the heavenly spheres. But how would her creatures survive? They were not made from her immortal flesh after all, and they needs must die. And so Nu Kua gently plucked them up, 2 by 2, and whispered to them the secrets of making life, the arts of sharing sex and having children. Then she departed, and returned to the palace in the sky where she lived with her brother consort, the dragon god Fu Xi. Fu Xi was delighted by the people his sister had created, and he quickly decided to share some of his magical gifts with these stumbling new creatures. He descended to the earth, where he taught them with patient smiles and gentle hands to weave fishing nets so that they might never go hungry, to craft lutes so that they could fill their lives with the same music and joy that rang through the heavens, and to make fire to keep them warm in the bitter winters and to bring light to their dark nights. Last of all, he taught them a system of writing and the art of reading so that they could pass their knowledge on to their descendants. These 4 teachings to this day are considered the highest of arts. But, as so often happens at the beginning of a new world, catastrophe soon struck. The spirit of fire and the spirit of water entered into a mighty war against one another, with all the seething fury and spitting rage you can imagine. The conflict spread quickly from heaven to earth and caused a great cataclysm. When it ended, Nu Kua descended to view the damage. Her beloved world was devastated. Its once smooth rock was deeply scored by chasms and crisscrossed with fissures and cracks. The forests were tattered and threadbare, burned to nothing but splinters and ash. The whole earth tilted and the sky gaped raggedly as violent storms howled out of heaven and buffeted the earth below. The choking dust that had first built the world appeared to be swallowing it up into storm once again. Wild animals, driven mad, roamed the world, fighting and devouring the terrified humans where they hid in caves and hollows. Nukua immediately started work. She doused the embers of the forests with her power, and piled up the felled trees and burned plants into mighty dams to hold back the floods. Fiercely she chased the wild beasts back to their lairs and gently soothed the frightened humans. In time, she turned to the hardest task, repairing that ragged sky. She gathered up smooth, round stones in her dragon's claws, in colours of red, yellow, blue, white and black. And grinding them to powder, she created a fine substance as bright as jade but as hard as iron, and carefully mended the great cracks in the sky. Ever after, the colours of those stones became not just the primary colours of a painter's palette, but the beautiful sunsets in the middle summer, when her children could gaze upon the colours and know her handiwork. At last, Nukua swept aside the great clouds of swirling dust and ash, and returned the world to its beautiful state, free from the chaos of the great storm. Good night. Sleep well, and I will see you tomorrow for another bedtime story.